I am unashamed. What about you?
I was briefly manager of the Duck Commander store for about 2 months until I got fired. Actually, I didn't get fired.
No, you did get fired. Your mom told me this week that she said no one is in the business. If you're
Wasn't
not
that the premise of the whole first show? Is that you can't fire a family?
Yeah, no, she
until
did.
you get fired.
You got moved. What would you say you got?
Transitioned?
I would say I quit. I would say I found my first replacement. I did it, and then whenever Mom was like, Bella's trying to find a job, I was like, oh, God, I got the job for her, mine. 'Cause one, I hated it. Two, I was terrible at it. So, but people would steal stuff. Family members would, you talk about just make stuff disappear. Like, every podcast someone had
I'm
in
getting a
here,
little nervous all of a sudden.
people would roll in.
Zach's like,
People would roll in
So you're
and
saying,
just clear out
you weren't
stuff.
bad at your job, it was just people stealing the merch?
No,
Is
I'm
that-
saying I figured that out and
Yeah.
saw how much
Yeah.
merch was disappearing from family
Yeah.
members in my 2 months.
But did that have anything to do with your firing?
did they
No.
blame it on you?
Yeah, like I was saying,
No,
like,
they didn't blame it
did they
on-
blame the losses on you?
No, that was the one good thing I did was figure that out and attempt to
You
stop
got to take
it.
the wins where you can get them.
Attempt to.
And then after that,
I
they
actually
still said,
didn't.
well, we
I
still want to
didn't
let
fix
you
the
go.
problem. I just identified
Yeah.
that particular problem.
So if you're tuning in, this is Unashamed for Hillsdale, Hillsdale Friday. This has nothing
led
to
with a
do with it, but
confessional.
we
Yeah.
just kind of sometimes just turn the camera on. We're in a good conversation. And I had mentioned that I had gone in there on occasion and grabbed merch. And apparently I may have been contributing to this problem, but I felt like it was very...
I always felt like that I was deserving of 2/3 of the inheritance of Duck Commander,
Yeah.
being the oldest son, that I never got. So a shirt or two here and there was like way short of 2/3 of everything.
So you always felt like
I just felt like I was going back to my Jewish roots, you know.
That's what I'm saying.
John
You're
Lennon,
just
you
taking what you
I'm just
owed.
taking what I was owed.
I never say you.
No, of course not.
And the next week you see
That's
John
why-
Luke and he tells you got fired, and you're like,
No.
That's why, John Luke, that's why you're my
Here's
favorite
my real
nephew.
confession. I came in yesterday, Sunday, and snagged some hats with my friend. We raided, and I didn't put it in the system. So,
You didn't put it in the system. Well,
Bella, if you're listening to this,
Well, now they
next
got
week
it.
when Belly gets fired.
Bella,
Well,
if
the
you're
last time
listening
I
to
was
this,
here
take out 3
filming,
hats.
I was here filming this, our Genesis episodes, and I walked in there, and they have a guy in there working. Like he's in the center of the room with a computer, and it's like an all-watching eye. And
Yeah.
everybody that comes in, he's hey, what?
Hey, what are you getting?
What's this for?
Are you talking about Luis?
Yeah, I don't want to give. I didn't know if it was if he was like undercover or what. So, but yeah, you've yeah. So any family
I
members?
think he's undercover.
Okay,
I think he's above the covers.
Well, we're
But-
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Luis and I have an understanding because he was in an orphanage that I helped, create years ago, and so that's just carried over
so
to the
you
current.
got- yeah.
He and I have
he
a
turns
deal.
a blind eye.
When I walk by,
does
he
like
just gives me a
this.
thumbs up.
I didn't see anything. Nobody's in here.
See, Zach, I could teach you some things about how to operate.
So today we're starting our Exodus series. So this is exciting because we just finished up with Genesis. Yeah, so you guys can sign up and take the class with us. If you haven't signed up to take the class, it's free, and we would advise you to take it with us because it makes it a whole lot more sticky and fun. You'll know what we're talking about because we'll reference stories that you got to, if you're not taking it with us, or maybe something Dr. Jackson says, because he's actually
we're so excited. We finally got to meet him in person.
Got to meet him.
When he came in and did the wrap up for Genesis with us, and so that's fun for me because you meet somebody that I respect him because he's really good at what he does.
Yeah.
And we're hoping you're taking the courses with us because that's the way to do it. I've learned a lot,
Yeah.
and now in Exodus I've learned a lot more. So I'm excited.
Well, we've been preaching on Exodus at our church, so this was like right up my wheelhouse for kind of where we're at in the season of our church. And what did you guys think about the whole Exodus story?
Oh, yeah, it was awesome. I mean, I like this video series more than the Genesis one because he did go deeper into especially some of the wording, the names of God, and I thought that was just really interesting to me. The names of the Hebrews, the difference in Egypt and Israel, I thought that was really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, more so from talking to him in person. I didn't really just because, like I said, when we had breakfast, I didn't fully understand the idea of how much Exodus truly, how much of the New Testament revolves around the story of Exodus. I thought Exodus was just just about plagues and stuff like that. I just didn't think it was any like
Just plague
significance
stuff.
to like, the New Testament stuff and things like that.
And it's like the most significant.
And he was like, it's the like pinnacle story of Scripture, which was pretty interesting. And something he talked about a lot that really I kind of found interesting was this idea of like, talks a lot about the hand of God throughout Exodus, and about how, for Pharaoh viewed himself as a god, and here's this man Moses who's kind of one-upping him in all these things, and just like how inferior he would have felt to this man who is doing all these things that none of his people can do. So that was one of the coolest things for me, was kind of learning more about that. 'Cause I used to view it more as like Pharaoh versus God, but it's really more so Pharaoh versus Moses, and Moses is just a mere man, and he's defeating Pharaoh. Which is pretty cool.
It harkened back to me. You remember whenever Dr. Jackson we were talking about the suffering. When he heard, was it Hagar? He said, "I hear your suffering. Now go and suffer some more." And how he had mentioned then that this was going to be a narrative that's going to go all the way through the Hebrew history, and he's right. And it really, you start to see the beginning of that standpoint here, when they're literally enslaved and then they're suffering, under this like harsh place. And so this is going to be the way it's going to be all the way through. And even when you get to the promised land and later in Joshua, and it seems like now there's finally victory, it starts a whole new process for them. They get led away, then we get to Judges. So it's just this repetitive cycle that happens over and over and over. But just like us, right? I mean, that's the idea. Sometimes even released, you tend to want to go back under something is not healthy, is not good, and yet that's what we see.
That's what they wanted. Yeah,
exactly.
I thought it was interesting how Exodus starts. When we started our Exodus series at church, my initial text, I actually kicked off the series, and it was my text was Exodus 1, verse 1 through 7, and at first, when I read it, I was like, "Man, how do I?" There's just not. It seemingly doesn't seem like there's a lot of meat there. I'm like, "Man, that's that." But the more I got into it, I was like, "Man, it's so interesting coming out of Genesis, which we just finished, and there's this kind of narrative in Genesis that is seen right here in how Exodus is set up, and I think it sets up the battle really between good and evil." Satan versus God. What is God's ultimate agenda? What is Satan's ultimate agenda? Spoiler, God's agenda is life. Satan's is always death. So it's a death work versus a life work. But if you look at the beginning of the Bible, when God creates humanity, which we talked about in the Genesis study, Genesis 1:26, he created them in his image, male and female, and his instruction to them was to be fruitful and to multiply, and then to subdue the earth and have dominion over it. And so the way that I've always read that and viewed that is like God creates humans and then he gives them a vocation. And their vocation is, I want you to go make babies. Right? I want you to go multiply. And then through
and apparently y'all got that.
You guys are doing that well.
Yeah. You too, Zach. I mean,
Just trying to be good,
the three of y'all have been very obedient.
How many do you have now?
3.
3?
Yep.
And
another on the way.
Another on the way.
Yeah.
Wow. And then you got
3.
And
definitely not one on the way.
Yeah. Y'all just had one. Y'all just had
we
a baby.
just had one. No time soon.
And your daughter, by the way, your oldest daughter got the. We were here for the conference, Sadie's conference, Live Original conference with 3,500 young women, and the benediction at the end of the whole entire experience was your 4-year-old daughter.
It was her saying it very swiftly. Good night.
Yeah, they set her up for more.
Yeah. No, she's the sweetest. Yeah, she was singing. There was a video of her singing in bed last night when she was supposed to be asleep, and she was singing "Jesus from the Mountains," Jesus in the Streets. So she took a lot from conference, which was really sweet. So,
but that's like what God's called us to do, is to create these families and cultures and societies, and it's like be fruitful, multiply, and then basically take the Garden of Eden and then go expand the borders of the garden to encompass the entire globe, which is the idea of the garden is a temple. So it's almost like I want God's like, I want my temple to spread over the entire earth, and you're the agents that are going to do that. And then things got really wonky, got really disturbing. Sin entered the world, and then Noah happened, the flood happened. The war got so violent that God's like, I just got to wipe everybody out except for 8 people. But when those 8 people were saved through the ark, God comes back and he gives them the same exact instruction that he gave Adam and Eve, which is to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And then you have the Tower of Babel story where things get wonky again, and God comes in and he pulls Israel out, or Abram out. He says, I'm going to make you a nation. And the kind of the idea there is the same thing. You're going to be fruitful, you're going to multiply, and you're going to fill the land. And so when you get, and then Joseph happens, Joseph comes on the scene. I'm just doing like a quick recap of the book of Genesis. Then Joseph comes on the scene, and you have the whole story that how Israel actually ends up in Egypt.
Right.
The way that, like, the reason why the Israelites are in Egypt was because Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery, and he rises to a prominent position, and then the whole family comes eventually.
Right.
And
Which
so,
you think about, Zach, the interesting part of that is that Abram at that time in Genesis 12 is called out of where he was to go someplace different, to the place I'll show you, God said. And then now we're coming along, and then a promise was made that his lineage would go back and have this land, and yet we see this process working out, that it took a trusting of God through the whole process. Now we're talking about generational faith to believe they were part of that process. So every generation that goes along, they're waiting for this promise of God, and now we get to Exodus, and they find themselves literally enslaved and surrounded and seemingly no way out. And so you're talking about the ultimate trust that God's going to do this. You know what I'm saying? I mean, like...
But it's interesting because when we've read these stories about Joseph in the past, or at least me, like I taught them, a lot of times I've taught them like almost like isolated stories.
Yeah, right.
And so, but you're like, but then when you get to Exodus, you're like, oh, this is just a continuation of what's already been happening.
Right.
And so when he gives the story here, he's saying, like, before he even sets up that they were in a conundrum, he basically says that Joseph ends up there, but then the current leader, Pharaoh, just forgot about it. He didn't know Joseph. Mm-hmm. And so if you think about, well, who does this Pharaoh figure represent, which Dr. Jackson talks about, who does he represent? Satan.
Yeah, evil one.
And so whatever his agenda is, it's similar to Satan's agenda. And so it's interesting to me that when you read this, what Israel did, it says in verse 7, the people of Israel, I just think it's so interesting, were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. So you read this and you're like, well, they did the thing that like they were supposed to do.
Right.
And it was that very thing. They were actually doing the cultural mandate. They were multiplying, filling the earth, doing all the things, and they're doing that inside of Israel. And then Satan, Pharaoh, looks at that and says, I have to stop the fruitful multiplication of life.
Right.
And that sets up kind of the whole story.
Yeah, and he thought he had thwarted it because, remember, it started with just 70 people. That's the group that original little group that kicked off, and then now we're becoming this, what did Dr. Jackson say? Probably 2 to 3 million, because we have the number of men, and once you multiply it out to women and kids, you're talking about millions of people. Yeah. And so this thing has flourished, inside of Egypt. Yeah. So just to your point, now they're ready to rock, but it's like, will they? You know?
Yeah.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah, what do you think? Wow. So when you read that, you think about like our current cultural moment. I think that's why a lot of the attack from the evil one is always on, like, it ends up with like a destruction of life and procreation and like the multiplication of life.
Yep.
Like you kind of see that strategy still employed today.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were going to attack a culture or people, that's the way you'd have to do it. You'd have to somehow keep that from happening, the multiplication process. And that's exactly what he does. I mean, how else do you explain, we're up to 60 million aborted children? And in some areas, there's more children aborted than born. I mean, that has to be of the evil one and demonic, or how would it even be possible, for this to happen? So you see the mindset.
Yeah, and they say that there's no like distinguishing numbers between outside the church and inside the church.
Right.
Which is a crazy statistic.
The thing I was thinking about when thinking about like how the Israelites in Egypt were persecuted, but then they continued to multiply, and then the more persecution, the more they increased. Thinking about how like that's how God works a lot of the time, and we see that in Christianity too, where whenever it's easy, after we multiply and people forget God, you start to see the downfall. But in places where it's persecuted, you see it flourishing and growing. And it's persecuted, so it's, kind of underground, in Asia or the Middle East or places like that. But you see it growing. Yeah. The harder the persecution, you still see it growing because people are still, God is working in them. He's hearing their cries, and you see them doing, trying to follow him even in terrible situations, and you see him blessing that.
Yeah, and by the way, if you're just tuning in, you can sign up and take this course with us for free at unashamedforhillsdale.com. It's free, and you can get into the discussion with us. But that's a great point. I mean, why do you think that it multiplies in time when they're suffering like this? What do you think that is?
I think that talking about what Christian just said about how you looked at statistics for divorce, abortion, for whatever, drug use, and it's like, oh, there's no difference in Christian communities versus non. But my question is, like, who are the Christians that they're interviewing? Like, is it like you've got to separate your cultural Christian or whatever versus your person who's actually following the way, following God? Like, of those people, what are you calling? Are you calling a Christian someone who says, like, oh, I'm a Christian? Or are you talking about someone who's in church, in their community, worshiping, praying, reading scripture every day, trying to follow those things? Are they the ones falling into those statistics too? I doubt it.
There's a book by Nancy Pearcey where she cites a study that essentially looks at men who are the most violent men in America. And so they poll like 3 different types of men. Mm-hmm. One group are atheists or non-believers, non-Christians. One group is nominal Christians, meaning that they profess the name of Christ. If you ask them on a survey, are you a Christian? Yes, I'm a Christian. And then the other group are people who attend church at least once a month, or some statistic that like ties it to church attendance, and maybe reading the Bible. It's some just basic like liturgical stuff that church people would do. Yeah. And guess which group was the most violent of all the 3 groups?
Nominal Christians.
Nominal Christian men were actually the most violent group, but the least violent group and the most faithful group was actually those who were in regular church attendance, because that was the marker of someone who was actually walking with Christ. So it'd be interesting to see those numbers, if you correlate them. But but I just found
it was the toxic war on masculinity.
What was it? The toxic war on masculinity. How Christianity reconciles.
I just thought of it. It just came to me.
It just came to you. It just came to
it's the way my mind works.
Teleprompter on the back here. Thank you, Maddie, for breaking the fourth wall again.
Yeah, I actually think that was part of the study. I didn't read the book, but I think that might have been where the study came from what I just said.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it may have been.
Yeah.
Yeah. She mentioned the study. I forgot the guy who did it. She just references it in the book. I found it interesting because it does kind of.
And it takes you back to the narrative that we've been talking about all through Genesis, and now we're going to see it again all through Exodus about the idea of obedience. And somehow that got a bad rap because law is going to come out obviously in this book, and so it's like, well, we can't keep the law. We can't really be obedient. We're humans. We're flawed. We're fallen. And so then we just somehow just excuse ourselves from being obedient to God. And if there's one thing you see from throughout this whole process, the best way to be is obedient to God.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because what Pharaoh does is consistently not be obedient, even though consistently he has the opportunity to do the right thing, and he continues to choose to not do the right thing. Which it makes him ultimately suffer, and his people suffer, as a leader, and which is really sad, when you see it.
And did anything stick out to y'all that was interesting about Moses' name? Because every time, growing up, I've heard like Moses means, to draw one out. But he made the point of like Moses' name can mean one who is drawn out, but one who also draws out. So that cool. That. Yeah, I thought that was so cool because Moses is drawn out of the river, but then God also calls him to draw his people out of slavery.
Right.
Yeah.
So I thought that was so interesting. Of like Moses is drawn out of the river of the Nile, but then God also calls him to be the one to draw his people out. So
yeah.
I've never like heard the two used like that.
That's interesting because if you think about, we talk about this on a podcast a lot, that Christ, he saved us from sin. and death, right? He saved us from, so he pulled us out of. But we would argue that a lot of times, for a lot of people, the gospel ends there when probably biblically it doesn't. Biblically, it starts there, and then he calls us out, and then he calls us to. So it's, I think it's that same thing in Moses' name that you kind of see that even when you're moving into the New Testament story when Jesus comes, that he saves us from our sin. But John 6 says he also gave his flesh for the life of the world. So to something, which you also see in the cultural mandate too,
right?
That go. Like, you're my vice regents to go expand and have dominion and expand this over the earth. So I view that, Christian, as Moses exercising a form of dominion and acting as God's agent.
Yeah. No, that's cool.
And look, this is the first place we talked about abortion earlier. This is the first place out of many places now going forward in culture where infanticide and abortion are brought in. That was how Pharaoh decided to deal with what he called the Israelite or the Hebrew problem. Was we'll just kill all the males.
Why do you think he chose males? I'm just curious. You have any thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
I mean, I'm assuming just so he would stop the procreation of them. But I don't know.
He could have chose females, right?
Right. He could have. That's right. Either way, unless he wanted to enslave
if he was thinking maybe of it from like a military standpoint.
I think it probably was very strategic on the part of Pharaoh. I mean, you think about if you're going to subjugate a culture, then when you have to first feminize the culture, so you kill the males off.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And
so they couldn't form an interior military or like a revolutionary type idea.
Is there a foreshadowing of that to Herod? Is there a correlation?
Absolutely. I think we were talking about typology in the last and looking at how this overlays into the New Testament.
Right.
That's a great point. That then you have this same exact picture happen when Jesus, the Messiah, shows up. Go kill all the babies.
Right.
They go exterminate the threat. So then Herod becomes like a Pharaoh, which ultimately they're both like Satan.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think absolutely that there's a correlation here, and then Moses is a Christ figure at least in that sense. That so that's a really good point. But I think that's the thing about. I just thought it was interesting when God is the dealer of whatever the thing is. It's always that life is multiplied. So you mentioned earlier that how in persecuted cultures the kingdom doesn't like you would think that's when the kingdom gets like stomped out. In China, for example, or underground churches, like Iran. I mean, there's what's going on in Iran. There's been more Muslims brought to Christ in the last 10 years than the previous 1,600 combined. You think, well, how is it happening in these persecuted areas? I think it's because where God is active, there's always life and life expansion. So then you got these midwives that come along, but they even in the face of he's like, go exterminate the threat. And they just multiply even more because God's favor was resting on the right people. And it's like, you can't stamp this out.
Right. And I loved the point he made about the midwives being sort of the first ones to stand in the gap. You know what I'm saying? It was like these women, and they even played the game because they were like, they knew he considered them, these slaves, to be nothing more than animals. So he was like, well, you know how the animals are. They're so strong. They just have these kids before we can even get there to exterminate them. And so they played into his narrative to thwart him. Yeah, which was brilliant. But I love that idea that God puts people in places to be able to accomplish what he wants done. And I was thinking when I was watching the thing, I thought about, it's not really relative, but it is something interesting.
Had you picked up, he kind of talked about it, the throughout Exodus where the difference between when they were called Israelites and then the Egyptians would call them Hebrews.
Yeah.
I never heard that, and I thought that was so interesting.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit.
So he said when in that first part of Deuteronomy, whenever Pharaoh is referring to the Israelites, he calls them the Hebrews. Yeah. And then throughout the time that they're in Israel, the Egyptians call them the Hebrews, but the Israelites call themselves the Israelites. Yeah. Yeah. Which that kind of going on to thinking about the name and the name of El being God and Israel being the people of God or the people who struggle with God, but specifically Israel is the name that God gave them, and then they made the switch of going from we're the Hebrews that these other people are calling us to, like, no, we are Israel, the people of God. We're using the name that God gave us, and that's how they kind of like came together.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it all goes back to they were descendants of Jacob.
Yeah.
Again, go back to the very first part of this. Jacob had 12 sons, and so Israel's coming out of Jacob. Jacob was going back to Genesis, son of Isaac, who was the son of Abraham, and so Jacob is Israel. Jacob is the referencing Israel. When you read in the New Testament, it'll talk about Jacob and Esau, for example. It's actually talking about Israel. It's not talking about the individual person of Jacob. It's the nation of Israel. And then when they use Edom, it's talking about the nation of the Edomites. But yeah, I just love it again that when it says here that God dealt with the midwives, because they were the ones that were in there making the excuses and really for Israel and taking up for Israel against Pharaoh. And God rewards that. And he said God dealt well with the midwives, and the people grew, multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. And so even like they were blessed, and their blessing was what? Fruitful multiplication. And these were people that were the midwives that were supposed to kill the babies, and they said, we're not going to do it.
Do you think that meant that I've never thought about it before, but that the midwives couldn't bear children, and that's why they were midwives? And because it said he blessed them with family there, or just had they not? I mean, I wonder.
Oh, yeah, I didn't think about
there
that.
seems to be something in that blessing that they were lacking. And I've never really thought about it before, because it says that. I mean, gave them families of their own, like as if they couldn't maybe have children on their own. Maybe they had been barren, and maybe that's why they took that job. I don't know. And I guess I need to do a little deeper.
That's a good point. I don't know. Either way, though, they were blessed with family,
Right.
And so I think that's the thing that we in our culture we tend to think that children are a liability, and they are if you got kids like mine. But I joke around a lot about it because they tear up stuff. But I'm like, you say, oh, kids, man. But like, man, I think about like, so we adopted Ruth about the same time y'all had Honey, and we were out of the game. Like I was out of the parent game. I'm like, man, we've done that. Like we were enjoying not empty nesting, but we could like go down and have a date, Jill and I. Anytime that
Because your kids were big enough to
watch themselves.
The oldest ones could watch the youngest.
Yeah, they could watch themselves, and so we would just go downtown, our little town we live in, and we'd go have a date night whenever we wanted. Now, like we got to think about like babysitters and all that, and then you get diapers and all stuff that we were just out of that world.
Yeah.
When you're in it, it's like you just buckle down. It's like this is what we're doing. We're in it. You don't think about
It's a season.
it. But then once you get out of that season, you're kind of like, man, this is awesome. So we were in that place, and I remember like whenever we got the call about Ruth, that popped in my mind a little bit, like, oh, that there's a lot of freedom that's gonna evaporate if this like happens, if we actually adopt this child. And the truth is that a lot of freedom was evaporated. But what we have obtained in exchange is God's expanded our capacity for love, which I didn't know I had.
Yeah.
And so I understand
Right.
that what a blessed children are a blessing from the Lord. And so now we have this new child that is our family that now I'm like, I can't imagine my life without this child. You guys can probably say the same thing about all your kids, right? It does rob you of your freedom, but what you get in some type of freedom, but what you get in return is such a blessing. And so I think that narrative is so key throughout all of the Exodus story and really our story. And when you think about what is actually at stake here, it's Satan wants to steal, kill, and destroy, and God wants to give life, and that's
which is why he attacks family. I mean, it's always at the root of it. Happened in the garden. It was that because let's face it, this first sin we saw there, it didn't just destroy them in the sense of being kicked out of the garden, but it also put this impasse in their family. And then the first thing you see as a result is two of their sons, one of them kills the other one. And that's the progressive idea that goes forward. You start attacking family, then you're going to start getting into problems. You miss the blessings. Don't forget to sign up to take these classes for free on unashamedforhillsdale.com.
But I thought his point was so interesting that he talked about before Moses kills the Egyptian, like kind of the dude, like two different school of thought of one, which is I think what probably most people think of. He looks around to see if anybody's watching him. Or the one he talks about is him looking around to see if anyone's going to do something about it before he chooses to, kind of a more passive approach to it. But I've never read that passage and thought of it in the latter sense. I don't know what y'all thought about that point.
Yeah, about his sort of indecisiveness. I had always taught it differently, and it made me rethink it because
it made me rethink it too.
Because I always kind of imagined, Moses growing up, and which we'll talk more as we go through about how his childhood was because of being in the house of Pharaoh, as being brimming with confidence and like seeing that moment and thinking it's time for him to seize leadership. But he presented a different picture, and he could be right. That he always had a kind of an indecisive nature, especially about himself, and so he kind of creates that picture. He says there's two ways to look at that. One is is there anybody watching because I'm fixing to kill this guy, versus is anybody else going to step up and do something, and which fits what he says later when he doesn't really ensure he should answer the call of God, and so he's like, well, somebody's going to have to speak because I can't speak. And it's really interesting. I mean, it could be a flaw that you see all the way through Moses' life, because I'm not sure. I'm not sure that 40 years out there with the sheep just totally waylaid his confidence. Is still a lot. It could be that as well. I'm not sure.
Yeah, because I thought the same thing. You could take it both ways. You could take it like he has the confidence. He's seen if anyone sees him. He kills a guy, and then that fits with what he does next. Was when he runs out to the wilderness and he saves his wife from the bandits. And it's like, oh, like he's a confident guy. He's got it all together. Like he knows what he's doing. Or the other way is you see that indecisiveness later, especially in the burning bush, when God calls Moses, and which is one of my favorite exchanges of the Bible. I'm just going to paraphrase it. God's like, Moses, you're going to go back to Egypt. And he's like, I'm too old. And he's like, no, I'll give you the staff. And he's like, they're not going to believe me. And God says, put your hand in your coat, and he heals the sickness. And Moses is like, I still think it's going to be enough. And he turns the staff into a snake, and Moses is like, no, I don't. That's still not good enough. And he's like, oh well, no, you got it. And Moses is like, well, okay, fine, you can do all this power, but I can't speak well. And he's like, no, I'll give you Aaron. Like, go.
Every excuse
Moses can do, and he kind of does that all up until they're out in the wilderness way later after the whole exchange. Moses finally goes and speaks to God and kind of recovers from that, but he doesn't get over that for a while.
Yeah. Because think about it. I mean, 40 years have gone by. Moses was around 40 when this happens, and he goes down there, and then he's in that desert for 40 years. Yeah. And there's just a handful of verses covering 40 years of his life, but whatever it was, he certainly, whatever confidence he had in some of those early exploits, it's gone. Yeah. He does not have that anymore. And I've always taken that as a symbol for any of us, that we always have to have humility training in our lives at some point, which is why we go through difficult times. I mean, the New Testament, you see the idea about, James says that perseverance has to do its work. So you become mature and complete. And so the idea is without humility training at some point in our lives, we're going to think it's us. In those moments, you have to rely on God to do what he does. And so I look at our own family, and, Dad turned his life around, and so did Mom, and then they move out on the river and they start a business, and it's like, well, you'd expect instant success, but it wasn't. It was almost 40 years for us, about 35-year humility training program where we literally were manna, except our manna was fish, and we had just enough to make it all those years.
Well, that's why I think that's why the expansion happens inside of the struggle, because this is the story of those people, those who struggle with God. Yep. Israel is like those who wrestle or struggle with God.
That's right.
So it's like, the struggle.
And remember, the change was from deceiver to struggler.
That's and that's the thing, right? But he was a deceiver, but he became a struggler.
Exactly.
And because you read that text and you're like, man, how is this guy the guy if he's wrestling with God? Isn't that kind of disrespectful? Isn't that kind of like shouldn't it just be full submission, right? But no, we're struggling with this, and I think it's like they say the struggle is real. That's like a phrase that you hear people say, but it is real. Israel. It is real. It is Israel. The struggle is real. The struggle is real. I just came up with that. That's pretty good.
Well, I like it when a guy has a
It's not
moment.
like that. It's
A
not
guy
like
has
that.
a moment when the cameras are
Yeah,
going.
I was like, that's a
Man, I'm
the
actually
struggle
pretty
is
smart.
real. The struggle is
Yeah.
real. That's pretty
You
good.
can get our T-shirts. The struggle is that real.
The struggle is
yeah.
real.
If James
our
was here, this
website,
would be a
no.
T-shirt
It'd be a
moment.
T-shirt moment. But I think the reason why the multiplication comes, which when you think of multiplication, you should think fruit. The fruitful multiplication, the fruit comes, the harvest comes through the struggle, because the struggle actually puts us in the posture that we probably should be in all the time, which is, wait a second, I'm not sovereign.
Yeah.
Like he's sovereign. And so when you think about your own lives, I don't know, to young guys, probably you have had experiences where you've like, I know I have. I've had several like existential crisis moments where I've thought, man, it's all coming down around me.
Yeah.
And what's weird is I think you can go two different directions there. One, you can deny that, or you can lean into that. And I've chose to lean into that. And if I go back and examine my life, I think, man, those are actually the moments when I really felt the presence and the nearness of God more than any other time. But it was in that, because it was all of my the facade of my own self-preservation was like stripped away, and you're like, I have nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
Have y'all experienced that in your own life?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. And just thinking of like, especially as I've learned, like I think this happens when you learn more about anything. I think especially the Bible and life. At some point, you get to the point that you're like, oh, everything I believe is like wrong, and that's not really true. But you feel like that because you're like, oh, I didn't realize how little I knew about anything. I mean, I kind of feel like taking these courses, honestly. I'm like, wow, I didn't realize how little I actually knew until I've started researching. I'm like, wow, there's way more to this whole thing, and you feel like, oh, I'm not enough, or I don't know enough, or how can I speak about this? But I think that's where God comes in. Like you lean into that, you say, okay, I can be humble. I can step outside of myself and say, yeah, my power is weak, but God is strong.
Yeah, and it's just a willingness to learn, too. Like there always has to be a willingness to put in the work, to study things, to learn things, to have conversations, and to also, disagree with some things, and then you get to a better place versus, I think sometimes disagreements can be super helpful to end up, landing the plane somewhere. But yeah, I think like you said, just humility and just a willingness to. Because even, languages, like, yeah, you think you know a bunch of stuff, and then you realize that the original context it's written in, and then that this word actually means this, and then somehow it got translated to mean this, and it's like, yeah, it's like maybe the thing I've been learning is not actually what the original context was supposed to mean.
And the core has to be how can I then relay what God has taught me through whatever process I went through. Lisa and I, we do a lot of marriage stuff, and it's not because we're marriage experts, because we got a PhD and whatever. It's because we lived through some really hard stuff. And through those really tough times, God taught us some things that we now want to help teach other people. And so when we go in and do what we do, it may be different from Mr. and Mrs. Jones over here that are counselors and have more of an intellectual approach to it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's great because you learn stuff either way. Ours, though, is going to be much more, you've suffered, now go suffer some more because you're helping someone in that situation. So this past weekend, we were at a place and we got up and we shared what we always share and some of the things that God taught us through the process, through several presentations. And one of the ladies who was there, who had helped organize the event, was our kind of contact person. At some point she kind of pulls us aside and she's like, yeah, my husband and I, we went through this same thing and we've just never really been able to talk about it yet. And, and she's telling me the story. And so she goes through the whole thing and she tears up as she's telling us. And then I looked at her and said, well, you just told it for the first time. And it hit her that she felt safe enough to tell us this because we had just shared it. And I said, you realize God's going to now open some doors. You're going to have to tell some other people, some people you work with, somebody you run across that's really hurting. And now all of a sudden you've gotten the confidence because God's helping you deal with that. I said, so that's the way it is for all of us. We're enslaved to something. And when we're freed by Christ, then we have an opportunity to help other people find freedom. And unless you tell what God's victories are, you're never going to get to something better.
And it's always a process, too.
Yeah.
It's a long obedience in the same direction, to quote Nietzsche or Eugene Peterson, wherever you read that at. But I think it is long. Yeah. And so for them, it was 40 years.
That's right.
I mean, think about it like that. Think about how that would sell today. We're going to start a discipleship ministry. And hey, you get to experience the whole thing. It's a 40-year run.
In 40 years, you get a free T-shirt.
40 years, you get the thing. Yeah, everybody be like, I'm out. Right? But it is a process of becoming, and I think that's the story of Exodus, as we see here. It's like a drip, and we're just at the very first 2 chapters here. But it's how basically Moses arrives on the one is it's how the Israelites are being persecuted, and Pharaoh is like, I got to kill them, and then Moses kind of gets spared through this whole process. And he's born in a really weird circumstance where his mother is able to ship him off in this little mini ark, so to speak. I love how he kind of made that correlation too, and the correlation of
that was really cool.
It's like an ark, because you think about like Noah, the ark, God, he saved humanity through the ark, and now it's like a little mini ark.
Yeah, that was a really cool point.
You got the Red Sea here with the
Sea of the Reeds.
So you have all the repetition here. Moses gets pulled out and saved, and he's now going to save others. He's going to be the deliverer of Israel. And that's just the first part of this. But once he leads them into the wilderness, I mean, you would think we got these crazy plagues about to happen, which anybody's going to be like, wow, who is this Yahweh? Mm-hmm. By the way, he hadn't told him anybody his name yet, but eventually going to tell him their name. Then he does the whole Red Sea, which I thought, if I was a member of the people that were exiting Egypt, I think at the Red Sea moment, I would have been like, he's got us.
I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm in. And they're like, and they're not like that. They're like, we want to go back and be slaves. and I think I would be like that, but I wouldn't be like that, right? Because that's the condition of humanity. Then you say, well, okay, now that we've gone through the Red Sea, I would think, then I would be good. Well, no. Then they had bread literally raining out of the sky, and God, like literally his provision.
Yeah. God's
providing, and they're like, God says, just make sure you only take what you need. And they're so scared that God won't provide. This is insane. But this is who we are. They're so afraid that they start gathering up and hoarding
more
up
than what
they need.
Yeah.
And God's like, I'm like giving you, kind of like Moses, though. How many signs do you need? I think that's the point. Yeah. It's not about the signs. In fact, when you get to the New Testament, Paul says that the Jews demand signs and the Gentiles demand intellect or intellectual reasoning. And he's like, I didn't come with either one of those. I came with Christ and him crucified. And he just narrowed it right down to the sacrificial nature of who this God is.
That's good.
By the way, if you want to sign up and take this class with us, you can go to, it's free at unashamedforhillsdale.com. We're in the story of Exodus. This is the first 2 chapters. It's the first lecture that we're talking about today. But yeah, I think that's just interesting how that narrative is here. But I think the story of Exodus is what it's ultimately pointing us to is, will you have reliance on me? I am the one who provides. Mm-hmm. God is the one that provides. Ultimately, he provides even the atonement to allow us back into presence.
Yeah, and I think that all the different pictures you see, like we've talked about, you also see the idea of you mentioned Herod, so you got that whole thing in the Jesus narrative. The water that keeps coming up, he mentioned that, how the water is a big part of the narrative in the book of Exodus, because you got the Nile River, which is here, which is the Sea of Reeds, and this whole idea. But then you got later on, that's a big part of the plagues. It starts with the river and turns to blood. And then later on, it's the Red Sea. It's just this continual thing. And then when you get to the New Testament, Paul even looks back and says, oh, yeah, this was almost like a mass baptism when they were all walking through, because it had water on all sides.
It's a baptism moment.
It is, which is huge, right? Because we understand that from our perspective, but here you're seeing where God's doing it with a whole, millions of people.
Well, Noah was a baptist, because what is Peter uses Noah's flood as another kind of like early baptism. He says that the waters of baptism symbolize. How does he say it? Symbolizes the waters
Salvation.
of Noah. The waters that flooded the earth symbolize the water of baptism that now saves you also, not the removal of dirt for the flesh, but a pledge of a good conscience.
Because he made the interesting point that the boat floated on the water.
Yeah.
We've always seen it the other way around. The water was drowning people, but he used the other side of that. The boat couldn't have floated without the water.
Interesting quick sidebar, because people call Jesus, well, obviously he's the second Adam, but don't people call Jesus like the second Moses, and that's the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Well, I just had this thought because he was talking about the betrothal scene at the well. He kind of correlated that with Isaac and Rebecca, and throughout history.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about it from the standpoint of John 4, with Jesus and the woman at the well, and kind of how that is. It's a betrothal scene in a sense of Jesus revealing himself to this woman at the well. But I was thinking too. So Moses is the first one that God reveals his name to, right? And then in the New Testament, Jesus, the woman at the well, is the first person that Jesus reveals himself as the Messiah to, which is, so I thought that was kind of interesting.
And it was Jacob's well.
Yeah.
I mean, it was actually one of these original wells from, way back.
Which is interesting, the location. I think it has to do with Exodus, because he doesn't really get into this part of Exodus, but Exodus 25, God gives Moses the instructions to build the tabernacle. And so there hasn't really been a temple structure yet that was more like official like this. That just hasn't been instituted yet. So when you think about the tabernacle, which is a big chunk of the book of Exodus, is the building of the tabernacle. The tabernacle is like a mobile temple.
Yeah.
So it's not quite the temple, because the temple that Solomon built was like a permanent structure. But this is like, they're in the wilderness, so there has to be like a temple. So why do you need a temple? Well, God tells us, and he tells Moses in Exodus 25:8, build me a tabernacle so that I may dwell with my people. So you have the reason why God wants a temple or a tabernacle. He wants to dwell with his people, and he did dwell with his people in the Garden of Eden. But you know what else is a temple structure? Is Jacob's ladder and that whole area that Jacob was in, which so I think that matters, because if you think about the beginning, God saw man alone, and he says it's not good for man to be alone. So he says, I'll create a suitable helper for him. So he creates Eve, and then they consummate their union through the sexual union, which results in the procreation of life itself.
Yep.
That it actually turns into more life.
Right.
And so the picture is a God or man and woman procreating, having children, relationship kind of mirroring the Trinity, mirroring who God is, and then they had that relationship horizontally with each other, but then they have that vertically with God and his presence. And you see all of that in the book of Exodus: fruitful multiplication, the presence of God. And so that's ultimately what the enemy's trying to destroy. So when you get the New Testament, to your point on Moses being second Christ, or Christ being the second Moses, that's kind of the whole point of the book of Hebrews.
Yeah, I was going to say Hebrews makes that point.
I mean, just like Christ, not necessarily a second Moses, like a better Moses.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then
that's why you see that word "better" used so much in Hebrews.
Yeah,
because
what are the other things that he's better in?
Oh, and then you got the covenant, the high priest, all the different examples.
So Aaron was a high priest.
Yeah.
So he becomes a better high priest than Aaron ever thought about. And we know
Melchizedek, but he was
better than
Melchizedek.
He's a priest in the order of Melchizedek.
Right.
He's a better sacrifice. Yep. He's a better temple. He's and so the whole book of Hebrews is like looking at the Exodus story and the giving of the law and the book of the covenant. And he's like, all that, Christ's superior, all of it. He's the fulfillment of all of it. Christ is the point of the whole thing. Christ is the point of the book of Exodus.
Yeah.
We're out of time, Zach.
Oh, are we really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so again, if you guys want to take this course with us, it's unashamedforhillsdale.com. We're in the story of Exodus, the most important story in the whole Bible, because we repeat it over and over again, and we are in the new Exodus. Join us every Friday for Unashamed Academy, powered by Hillsdale College. Make sure to go to unashamedforhillsdale.com and sign up. It's no cost to you. That's unashamedforhillsdale.com. And don't miss an episode of the Unashamed podcast by subscribing on YouTube, and be sure to click the little bell and choose all notifications to watch every episode.